Thank you for singing that. I kind of very last minute threw that song on them. Comes later in the message, but I'm going to mention that particular song. I was talking to Mrs. Pickens, I don't know, not 20 minutes before the message, and had told her that, and so it couldn't have been 15 minutes before the message that they were like, we can try to sing that, and so I appreciate you doing that for me this evening. Being willing to last minute do a song is an incredibly completely lost my train of thought on that one. So forget that. All right, Colossians chapter 3. I don't know what I was going to say. It's hard. Whatever it is, it's hard. Colossians 3. When you find your place, please go ahead and stand. Colossians 3. Colossians 3, we're going to start reading in verse 1. I believe I'm going to have us go ahead and read 1 through 17. I may have us skip ahead in a minute, but I think I plan on at least having us read those 17 verses. Colossians chapter 3, starting verse 1. If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affections on things above, not on things on the earth, for ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry, for which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience, in the which ye also walked sometime when ye lived in them. But now ye put off all these things, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. Put on therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Above all these things put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also ye are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And whatsoever ye do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Lord, I want to thank you for this evening, Lord. I thank you for the time we can take in your word. Lord, I do pray that you will you'll use me tonight, Lord. Help help distractions in my mind not to get in the way of what you have for us this evening, Lord, and your message. I pray this in your name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. Tonight I'm going to kind of continue on with, as I said last week, kind of ended up being a little mini-series inside of our Wednesday night series. These things that Paul is teaching the church, that as a believer, as one who is risen in him, is how he puts it in 3, I believe it was verse 1, which would be everyone who calls themselves a child of God. As one who is risen in him, these things we need to do. We looked at through this. I don't have in my notes what we've looked at in the past, so if I get these wrong, I'm remembering as much as you are. We looked at in the past some things that should be put off, some things that should be mortified. Tonight, or last week, I believe it was, we started the section where Paul teaches them the things that they need to put on. Once they put off the old man and the things that go with the old man, they are to put on the new man, and this list is what it means to be the new man. So last week, I attempted to cover 5 different areas on it: mercy, kindness, humbleness, meekness, and long-suffering. This week we're going to cover 3 more of those. They're found in verse 13 and 14. I know we just read them. I'm going to read those 2 verses one more time, and then we're going to kind of just jump right in here this evening. Verse 13, forbearing one another, forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And above all these things put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. So just jumping right in here, the first thing I want to see tonight, things that we are to put on as a child of God. Forbearing. Forbearing, I find a little interesting because of what it means and what the verse right before it ended with. Verse 12 ended with long-suffering. Last week, that's where we ended, long-suffering, which means patience or forbearing. This week, we start with forbearing, which means patience and restraint. So why would Paul have back-to-back two words that mean essentially the same thing? What could be the purpose of that? And I think there are multiple ways that we could go with that of why he did that. And we could, because there are some slight differences in the meanings of those words. But I think a lot of it comes down to it is simply learning by repetition. Because let's be honest, if we hear something once, we forget it. I just attempted to remember what the last 3 messages I preached on. I'm the one who preached them. I ought to know. You might hopefully be able to tell more than me. It's kind of a humbling statistic, but it's a bit eye-opening as a pastor. They say most congregations, I've given this before, you probably don't remember it, because they say most congregations remember 5% of what a preacher says. That is a tiny little bit. I mean, 5% is not much at all. So what that means, if I get up here and I speak for the next 30 minutes, most of you will remember 1 minute and 30 seconds. I can talk for 30 minutes and you're going to remember 90 seconds worth. At least the average person. Again, as the one who's up here, that's a bit humbling because, you know, as a preacher, we put a lot of time into study and into preparing, and you're only going to remember 90 seconds worth of that. So they teach you the way to combat that is repetition. Just to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, which is why you'll hear Pastor and I will both often do something along these lines, that we will give you an introduction telling you here is what we are going to be preaching on, and then we preach it, and then we have a conclusion that tells you what we just preached on. Because the thought is, if I say it, if you're going to get 90 seconds worth, if I say it 3 times, maybe you'll retain a little bit more. I was going to say 3 times that, but there's no way I'm going to get that much out of you. We're not getting 15%, but maybe, you know, if we can get it up to like 7, 8, we're doing pretty good. No, the entire purpose of us repeating things like that multiple times is in hopes that more sticks. The same tactic, I guess you could say, is used in schools. In math class, they teach you a new concept. The teacher doesn't get up in front of you and explain one time how to do a new concept, have the kids do one problem, and then set that aside and never touch it again. No, they explain it, and then they have 20 practice problems. Because with repetition, we remember. Parents, we will often do the same, that we tell our kids something that we want them to do. We rarely only tell them one time. And the more important that thing is, the more often we're going to tell them. Again, parents in the room, it's not as if you told your child one time to look both ways before crossing the road and then never told him again. You know, I told him once. If he gets hit by a car at this point, it's on him because I told him once. No, it's important. So as a parent, I can't count the number of times that I've told my kids, look both ways before you cross the street. You repeat yourself. And often, in all of those examples, you say the same thing, but a little different way. Pastor will often word things, or a pastor will often word things different ways throughout the message, so that if you missed it the first time, maybe the second time will catch your attention. A teacher may explain how to do the same problem in a few different ways because different kids understand differently. We homeschool with our kids. Lisa and I have talked about this a bunch of times. Her brain and my brain do not math the same way. We will come to the same answer, just from completely different areas. So we've kind of, with our kids, have both taken turns to see which one of them is going to teach math, because for some of them, the way she explains makes total sense, because it's probably the right way. For others, the way I explain makes sense because they have a weird brain like I do. It drives her nuts. She is the one, she writes everything out, and it's all, you can follow it perfectly. Most of the time, I have no idea how I got the answer, but it's right, so what's the problem? I can't figure out why that is wrong, but you can ask my mom. I got in trouble for it all the time because she wanted me to show my work. I don't know my work. I just know that's right. It's what it is. But the parents, or the teacher is often going to do that. They'll teach from different ways because, well, this kid is going to understand it differently than that kid does. A parent will often teach their kid the same lesson using maybe different wording, different methods, so that the kid remembers. And we see the same method of repeating used many times in the Bible. And that's what's happening here. This is important, so Paul is putting extra emphasis on it by repeating it, saying the same things using a little bit different words. Let's look at it again, maybe just a bit different. Forbearing, patience and restraint. I said last week, and we know this, patience isn't easy. Again, we spent some time on this last week, that you'll often hear people tell you not to pray for patience because the way that you get patience is by going through something that requires it. That's not fun. The way you get patience is by going through something that requires you to be patient. And I used this example last week, just like the only way to grow a muscle is to use it repeatedly. The only way to grow patience is to use it, is to work that. Building patience takes struggle. It takes trials. It takes difficulty. It takes God putting you through situations that require you to use your patience. And while that isn't fun, and while no one likes going through those struggles, patience is a necessary thing. The passage says, forbearing one another, remember, forbearing is patience and restraint. Typically, when we get impatient, it's because of another. To forbear one another, typically if we get impatient, it's because of some other person. I've never met anyone, and maybe someone in this room is that person. I've never talked to someone who gets impatient with themselves. A lack of patience, normally at least, is directed at someone else. I'm impatient and mad because whatever it is, traffic is so bad. Why do all these people have to slow down the road just to look at the police car that's sitting on the shoulder? It drives me crazy too, that, there's this huge backup and you finally get to the cause of it, and the entire thing stemmed from a police officer who's sitting there. There's no accident, there's no one pulled over, there's absolutely nothing to see, but everyone slowed down to see if there was something to see. Do you know why that bothers you? Because we're impatient. Or it's directed at, I'm impatient because, well, maybe this person is blocking the aisle at the store and they're going slower than I want to. Sometimes perhaps we ought to think that maybe there's a reason that they're going slow. I remember this, it was a few years ago now, but it sticks out to me because it's one of those, moments that you look back at and go, ooh, I really should not have been impatient there. I was impatient at a guy who was blocking the aisle at the store, and I was internally, I didn't vocalize this, but internally I'm annoyed by the fact that, man, he is blocking the aisle and he's moving so slow, and he must have somehow felt that, because he then at some point turned around and said, sorry, I'm a slow walker, I'm a combat vet that was disabled in action, and I have more steel in my leg than most cars do. And immediately it's that, oh, oops. But most of the time that doesn't matter to us because we're just, impatient that we're stuck behind this person because we struggle with patience. Love that forbearing also has the added definition of restraint, because we won't be perfect at patience. I don't care how much I try, I still get annoyed by traffic. I tell myself not to, I know there's going to be traffic when I go somewhere. I try to mentally prepare myself for it. I try not to let it bother me, but it still does. Every single time I get in traffic, it bothers me. Don't judge me. You're no better than I am. We won't be perfect, but we can show restraint. Just because traffic annoys me doesn't mean I have to scream out my window at people. Just because something causes you to be impatient doesn't mean you have to lose it. Show restraint. Paul says, Christians, put on forbearance. Did you notice I've just repeated myself there? Just saying. Next, put on forgiveness. Look at verse 13 with me again. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against you, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Like, I think everything in this list, forgiveness is a difficult thing. It's a challenge for us. If we're being honest in here tonight, forgiveness is something that we really, really struggle with. We often will say the words, and we'll pretend that we've forgiven, but very often that's all it is it's just words. Because we know we're supposed to. We know it's the correct thing to say, I forgive you. Very often it's just words. A passage says forgive more than just saying forgive. It says to forgive as Christ forgave you. Now that just got specific. I mean, that just set the bar at a whole new level now. Let's look at that for a moment. How did Christ forgive you? And we can learn how we ought to forgive based off of that. Christ forgave you before you were sorry. Really, we could even take it a step further than that. Christ forgave you before you ever committed the wrong. Years before you were born, Christ knew that you would sin, or knew the sins that you would commit, and he knew the wrong that you would do to him, and he took that on himself and died for you. He forgave you before you were even sorry for what you had done. That's how our forgiveness needs to be. It should not be that we get the mindset, well, I'll forgive when they ask me to. Because very often that's what we think. I'll forgive when they come and apologize to me. Or it should not be, and this is also very often what we do, it should not be, I'll forgive when they prove to me that they really are sorry for what they did. A lot of times that's what we do. Well, I'll say I forgive them, but I'm not really going to forgive until they show me that they mean it. Now, it may take time to earn trust back. I'm not discounting that. But it should be that forgiveness is immediate. It should be that you aren't holding on to it. That when someone does you wrong, rather than you holding on to that anger and all of that until they come and apologize to me, or until they come and show me that they really mean it and they really are sorry, no, it should be that you've forgiven them already. Forgive like Christ forgave you. Think of it this way. I'm awfully glad Jesus didn't wait till I proved to him that I was sorry for the sins I committed. Or there'd be no hope for any of us. Forgive like Christ forgave you. How did Christ forgive? He forgave before you were sorry. He forgave completely. It could be worded this way, unconditionally. It doesn't matter what you or I did. He forgave. Person could be a murderer, a thief, a whatever. If they call out to God, he forgives. Think of 1 Corinthians. I won't have us turn there right now, but Paul lists all these things that we would think are awful sins. And then he says, and such were some of you. And goes on from there. But ye are washed, but ye are sanctified, but ye are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus. It doesn't matter what they had done before Christ forgave. That's how forgiveness needs to be. That we can learn to forgive no matter what a person has done, no matter how they have hurt you, that we can learn to forgive. Now, I said this, I don't remember, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, I don't remember if it was on a Sunday or a Wednesday at this point, but somewhere in there, I'm not saying I am not saying to be unwise about it and allow them to hurt you again. I want to make that clear. I've heard people try to use that excuse before, that this person molested someone, and then they use the excuse, but they apologize, so they should be allowed back, or they physically abuse someone, but they apologize. I am not saying you trust them immediately. Again, a couple of weeks ago, I used this example. If someone broke into my house and then apologized to me for it, I'm going to forgive them, but I'm not going to tell them when I'm going to be gone and give them a key to my house. But I'm also not going to hold anger against them. Someone does wrong and apologizes for it. I have this example. I was hesitant to use it. I have this in there. I'm going to go ahead and say it. If someone, and I'll just word it this way, if someone hurts a little girl and then apologizes for it, I won't hold anger against them, but I won't allow them around my girls. There's a difference. I'm not going to hold anger against them, but I'm sure going to take some steps to protect those I care about. The key is forgiveness, not allowing what they have done to control your attitude. Christ forgave completely. Christ forgave and forgot. Psalm 103 verse 12 says, as far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. Think about this. It doesn't matter how far, whichever direction east is, that way. Brother Unger, help me, that way. Okay. Doesn't matter how far east you travel. I'm going to trust Miss Nick on this one because she's the only one appointed. Doesn't matter how far east you travel, you will never suddenly hit west. You may run into the western half of a country, but you can't travel east far enough that you suddenly are going west. Doesn't work that way. That's what he's saying. God removed your transgressions, your sins so far that they're never coming back. He forgave, and it's gone. The hymn I asked them to sing right before the message, what sins are you talking about? I don't remember them anymore. From the book of life, they've all been torn out. I don't remember them anymore. That's how Christ forgave. He forgave and he forgot. It's over. He's not going to bring it back up again. It isn't as if he keeps a tally, and the next time that you give into that sin that easily besets you, and he says, yep, I knew you would, just like last time, on this date at this time, you did the same thing then. No, he forgives, and it's gone. We struggle with that. Because again, often we use those words and we say that we forgive, but then the next time that they do something, we bring it right back up again. If we do that, if I say, I forgive you for doing this, and then the next time you hurt me, I say, yeah, well, remember that time you did this? I never forgave you. That's not biblical forgiveness. And often it is women, I guess, that get the bad reputation of doing that, but let's, bringing up something their husband did 10 years ago, but let's be honest, guys were just as guilty of it. That we say, oh yeah, I forgive that person, and then they do something wrong to us again, it's, yeah, well, just like last time. If you're holding on to that, you never forgave them. On top of that, you're holding on to a whole lot of bitterness. And all that does is eats you up inside. All that does is makes you miserable. You being bitter, bitterness is not in the message at all, but I'm going to because it came up. Bitterness has always been an odd thing to me. People who get bitter about something. Do you know bitterness does nothing to the person you're bitter at? Nothing. I'm going to pick Matthew because he's right in front of me. I can be bitter at Matthew, and that will eat me up, and that will cause all sorts of issues in me. It does nothing to Matthew. Matthew probably wouldn't even know I was bitter at him. It would mean absolutely nothing. And yet often that's what we do. Well, I'm upset at this person, and we hold this in, and it eats at me. Why? The only one that it hurts is you and the people that you care about, the people who are close to you. Learn to forgive. Let go of those things. Forgive like Christ forgave. Christian, put on forbearance. Christian, put on forgiveness. Christian, put on charity. Look at verse 14 with me. Above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. Now, I don't know how many of you remembered, because we already covered how most of people forget 95% of the message that's preached. But if you remember this is going to work way, way better. So I'm going to try to jog your memory. It's been quite a few years ago now that Pastor preached a series on charity. And here's what, where kind of his focus with that was, is that charity is not love like we normally think of it. Or like we often define it, because often that chapter in the Bible will be used as like a Valentine's Day or those sorts of things. But when you biblically look at charity in context, it is love for your church. And that was what the series that he preached was on charity was that love for your church. We can see that in what we're reading here as well. Remembering that Paul is writing this to a local church, telling them that above all these other things that he's already told them, you need to, as a child of God, you need to put these things on. Above all those, put on a love for each other. Put on a love for each other. He continues with that verse. He defines his own, as which is a bond of perfectness. Charity, a love for the people in your church, is something that is so often lacking. We need a love for each other. Think about this. When you love someone, you hurt when they hurt. I love my wife, so when my wife is in pain, whether that is physical or emotional, it hurts me, because I want what's best for her. I want to see her happy. I love my wife. I love my kids. When my kids are hurting, it hurts me, because I love my kids and I want to see them doing well. When we love someone, you hurt when they hurt. When you love someone, you care about them. Again, I love my kids, so I want to see my kids succeed. I want to see what is best for them, and I want to see them learn, and I want to see them grow. When you love someone, you pay attention to their needs. Lisa and I pay attention to what our kids need and do what we can to meet those needs. Our love for each other in this church ought to drive us to do the same. That we care enough about the people in our church that it hurts us to see them hurting. And do anything in our power to be a help. It ought to be that we care enough about our church family that we want to see them succeed and pray for them often. It ought to be that we care enough about the people of this church that we pay attention to their needs and bring them often to God. And that charity, that love for the people of your church will build a bond. So that though we are all different, we all care for and watch for and pray for one another. To build, as Paul words it, a bond of perfectness. I'm going to get ready to conclude the message tonight. So I told you what I was going to say. I said what I said, and now I'm going to remind you what I said. Christian, put on some things. Put on forbearance, patience, and restraint. Put on forgiveness. Strive to learn to forgive like Christ forgave you. Let go of bitterness and strife that hurt no one but yourself, and forgive. And then put on charity, a love and bond for the people of this church, so that you care enough to pay attention and to constantly pray for one another. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will, Lord, help us to learn this. I find it interesting that you read through this passage and Paul lists out all of these things that we are to put on. And the very last one, it's like Paul is saying, last but not least, above all, put on charity. Lord, and I don't want to diminish the other things that we looked at this evening. They are important for us as a child of God to put on. Lord, I pray that you will help us to desire to have the right kind of relationship with those in our church. Lord, help us to desire to love those in our church so that we hurt when they hurt, so that we care about them, and so that we are looking for their needs, so that we know how to bring them to you. Caring enough that we're paying attention and constantly in prayer for them.